wonder if we could backtrack a minute to some degree. We were talking before about crises around the world and how macroeconomic events have influenced you and affected the business. How were you affected specifically when it comes to the crisis in Japan?
Well, I think the crisis in Japan was effectively on the back of another crisis that happened in the electronics market 6 months before. The electronics market had seen a downturn like everyone else in 2008, and it had seen a number of the key manufacturers in the supply chain of electronics, such as the manufacturers of silicon, who had downgraded their facilities in line with the recession. Within the electronics, the market bounced back much quicker than expected. So as a result, you had high demand, low capacity. So we were already seeing a knock-on effect from those events. And then obviously the tragic events that happened in Japan only compounded that with a number of key materials that had been utilized in that area that had caused a knock-on effect to not necessarily short-term supply, but the lead times for certain commodities extending. One thing I will say though on the back of that is the electronics market, just like any other market, had a strong procurement influence because they diversified a lot of their manufacturing, a lot of their supply base to effectively ensure that they could ramp up in other areas of their business. So we were hit, but I think there were some good risk management strategies in place with those suppliers that meant the actual exposure to the world was relatively short term and was more based around a lack of information rather than a lack of product.
So has that changed your supply selection criteria at all? Because it sounds to me actually like it's quite robust to begin with.
I think if in reality it got our business to wake up. From a procurement standpoint, on many occasions, we'd push the need for dual source, we'd push the need for having a risk mitigation. Unfortunately, the problem with risk mitigations are they very rarely align with what actually happens. So they're more of a guideline. I think there's very few examples where you can go to the folder, pick out the mitigation when something happens, and it's a nice straightforward approach. I think what it did with an ESAB was it got the issue of risk higher on the agenda, and it got noticed a lot more the need to spend to mitigate some of those risks. And we have a very clear, robust risk management process now. And I think it got our business to move faster than perhaps they would have done.
So you were talking as well before about rising commodities costs being an impact. Obviously with tightening budgets and people simply just demanding lower prices, how have you managed to sit and balance that?
Managed it is a strong term. I think in all businesses you have to understand, once you've understood, of course, your leverage position, but more really understand what's happening in the commodities market and what you can do to affect it. It's not so much, unfortunately, in the last 18 months, it's not been so much a case of how have we avoided it, but how have we managed it? How have we ensured that it has been as low as it can possibly be? How have we ensured that we are optimizing where we can? The problem with a recession, and all procurement people will understand this, is that you look at your standard costings, and when the recession hits, all of those are lowered. So you through 2009, I believe, from a market position and from a business position, we worked on a very false baseline. And so what we've seen through 2010 is us returning to a more realistic baseline. But that's not to say that it is where it is now. I mean, I believe there are further changes. If you talk to anyone at the beginning of the year, no one would have predicted what's happened to copper in the last 2 or 3 months and the exceptional rises that have happened there. And as I said later on, I think if you've got a crystal ball and you can actually predict this, you are set to be the wealthiest man on the planet.
So what are the major lessons then for procurement that have emerged, I say out of the recession? That's not to say we're necessarily out of it, but hopefully off the back of the recession.
I think the major lessons that we've learned is that you constantly have to be reviewing your processes. You constantly have to be looking at what you're going to do to make a difference. I think we've seen a number of organizations around the world track to the market conditions rather than aggressively try and change the baseline of those market conditions. So I think ESAB has really fundamentally learned that you have to attack the moment, but you also have to be really understanding where you want to be in a year's time and really looking at diversifying your supply base and really understanding your leverage position.